Recent research suggests that there's been a decline in the health of members of the millennial generation compared to older generations. We've gathered experts to talk about what that means and why it's happening. That's next on WNIN Newsmakers. Welcome to WNIN Newsmakers. I'm April Nading. A recent United Healthcare study conducted this year has indicated an increase in chronic health issues for those who belong to the millennial generation. Here to give us a better understanding of overall millennial health trends is USI's Dr. Ryan Butler, Associate Professor of Nursing, and Dr. Aaron Reynolds, Associate Professor of Health Services Administration. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Tell me about how old are millennials now?
So millennials are 1981 to 1996, which makes them 27 to 42. And actually they are now the largest of the generations at 72 million.
The largest over baby boomers and everything?
Yep, they have surpassed baby boomers, and actually our Gen Z, which is the next population, is surpassing them as we speak.
Wow. So what are some of the health issues that millennials are experiencing at a higher rate than previous generations?
So millennial health is complicated. Like all generations, they have their unique issues. And they're actually called the wellness generation because they highly value health and fitness and a healthy diet. They're more likely to use technology to improve their health. But, and there's always a big but when we're talking about healthcare. According to a Blue Cross Blue Shield study with data 2014 to 2017, so this does predate COVID, they have higher levels of stress, they sleep worse, they have lower levels of energy. So all around, kind of those issues are impacting their overall health. But the top issues that we're seeing are diabetes, hypertension, back issues, because we tend to be huddled over our laptops and our computers, and we don't have very good posture compared to previous generations. Some of the neurodevelopmental issues like ADHD and autism spectrum, and then behavioral health issues like anxiety and depression.
So those are the things that are considered chronic?
All of those would be considered chronic diseases.
What about, are there other chronic things that we're seeing with them as well that are higher rate?
Heart disease continues to increase. We've got disparities within the conditions that we've been talking about. So it's not, even if we're seeing overall decreases in heart disease, we're still seeing increases in some of our populations, such as African Americans and Hispanics. There's differences between genders. Females have higher rates of some of the diseases that we're talking about. So women are more likely to have higher rates of diabetes. They're more likely to develop it younger.
So some of the things you were talking about, is it really that there's so much more among the millennials, or that there are so many more millennials?
It's actually the rate. So it is actually higher among millennials than it is among the other generations.
Well, that was one thing I just wanted to clarify, because you were talking about how much bigger that group is. It just stands to reason that there would be more of them. But I like what you were talking about, though, that they're considered more of the healthy generation, and yet they're not. So is it that they're not doing enough, or that it's that these other things they're doing that are counteracting?
Yeah, there are some other things that come into play with this generation. For instance, one thing that's really interesting is that they're ditching primary care providers. And we know that primary care providers are so important when it comes to managing and preventing chronic illnesses, care coordination with other providers, decreasing ER visits and hospitalizations. So we have to figure out, how can we get this generation to engage more in primary care and seeking care? And one way, as Aaron mentioned, is they really love technology. So things like telehealth visits, offering flexible online scheduling, those are all ways we can kind of try to hopefully get them to engage in care.
Well, I know I've seen commercials lately where to help you find a doctor, and I'm assuming those are aimed at millennials, to that they can have a teledoctor or even to find a primary one. Why do you think there's been that trend where they don't have primary care physicians?
Well, this is a convenience generation, so that's why I think the technology piece does play in. It's inconvenient oftentimes to schedule an appointment, and you can't get the appointment when you need to, and you don't want to miss work. This generation doesn't want to miss work to have to go to the appointment, or they feel like they can't miss work to go to the appointment. They have competing issues. Many in this generation are parents already, so convenience is a huge issue for them.
Do you think they also even associate that with being old? Like their mom and dad always had their doctor and went for their physicals, and I assume you're noticing that a drop in physicals and that kind of thing as well.
Absolutely, preventive care in general, all the things that you would do with your primary care provider, and the number of urgent care visits, immediate care visits is skyrocketing with this generation.
What about the generational trend for chronic health conditions? Is it getting worse with each generation, different chronic issues?
Well, we do know from the study from Blue Cross Blue Shield that Erin mentioned that the millennials' children are also utilizing care at a higher rate. So it is trending in that direction, but we couldn't say for sure that it is getting worse in those generations as well.
Wow. And go ahead.
This generation is developing their chronic diseases younger. And so they're, when we're looking at this age compared to the previous generation at that same age, they're developing all of the top issues that we talked about just a little bit younger than their parents or their grandparents. So that stress does play a role on wearing down the body.
But yet it seems like they would find that out. If they're finding it out younger, that would mean they're going to the doctor sooner, but it's not a primary care doctor. Is that what I'm getting? That they're finding it out too late? Or
access is an issue, and so health insurance does create some barriers to seeing your doctor. So when we think about, do you have health insurance? That's kind of the first question. And then whether or not if you have health insurance, can you afford to use your health insurance? So high deductible plans do make it difficult to see your doctor, even if you have a doctor.
Right.
And Erin and I are both in the field of public health, and we do a lot of screenings. People find these things out through community screenings or worksite wellness screenings, things like that. But then what is the follow-up after that? That tends to be the problem. So now I know I have high blood pressure, but what do I do?
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. So just because they're being diagnosed doesn't mean that they're actually treating it.
Correct.
But you were talking about also, I keep going back to that where it's talking about they're the healthiest or more health conscious.
They value wellness.
But what makes that true? What is it about them? Are they going to the gym more? Are they what?
So they're more likely to value a work-life balance. So they inherited this idea that you have to work. But this generation is changing that tune a little bit. They want to be able to have a nice family life. They want to have good, quality time with their family at home. They want to be able to take vacations. Americans are not good at taking our vacation time if we have it. We do feel that need to work, but this generation is starting to change that. And it's a little bit of blazing a path for the generations that are coming behind them. Because when we look at, Gen Z, their population, they look very differently at work and what they want to get out of their career. And so millennials are starting to change how we view work. And so they're going to be more likely to want to maintain a nice balance. That said, they do have higher levels of stress, they have higher levels of anxiety, and so how we balance out their values with kind of their access to health care is going to be the issue.
And it's all kind of evolves. From generation to generation, and to your point, they're probably paving the way a little bit for the next generation, and maybe that'll be better. But are there ways to combat a further decline, do you think? And
I think, like I mentioned earlier, getting them into primary care providers is going to be a key issue there. And how we do that, I don't know. Again, the technology piece is huge. And I think this generation is looking for a holistic approach to care. They don't want to just go in and look at one piece. They want to look at body, mind, spirit, emotion, environment, all of those factors that go into overall global health. They're looking for personalized care from their providers. So if we can offer that, I think we can get them in and keep them.
Well, you know, I teach yoga, and sometimes I'm amazed at how many people will tell me about an ailment they have, but they're not going to go to the doctor. And I think, I wonder, how did that happen? How did this, and they're younger than me, how that happened, that they have that mindset that they would rather suffer through the ailment or try other homeopathic, I guess, type of things than go to the doctor. And that's very important, that they actually seek care.
Well, we are very into instant gratification, and so we do self-diagnose. We've all been on the internet and Googled our symptoms and figured out what we have without going to our doctor. And so sometimes we feel like we know what we need to do, and it's a matter of doing it. And so turning that, yes, this is the condition I think I have, going to the doctor, and then figuring out a pathway to wellness. And so we are not good on the follow-through piece of that, where it is the long haul. If you're going to be healthy, it's a lifestyle change. And so we've got to change the way we eat. We've got to change the way we exercise. We've got to change the way we work. And that's hard.
It is, especially if they've had the example of work, like you were saying, and then all of a sudden saying, I don't want to do that anymore, but what does that look like? How do you find that balance?
Right.
It is a little harder. So what kind of resources are available for people with chronic physical illnesses?
So here locally, we have our two major health systems. We have Deaconess Health System, St. Vincent, Ascension St. Vincent Health System. There are primary care providers at all of those locations, and that would be the first place I would suggest that someone go, is to a primary care provider if they're looking to treat a chronic condition.
How do they find a primary care provider? You know, they may be thinking, I don't know, my mom's doctor isn't taking anybody anymore, or they're going to retire, or what do you do?
Yeah, the websites for these organizations make it very easy. Typically, you go onto the website and immediately they have welcoming doctor, whoever that may be, now accepting new patients. And I think both health systems, I know at least one of them, offer online scheduling right there that day. You don't have to call, which is a big issue for millennials. We don't want to use the phone. So you can just click on a time slot on a date that works for you, and your appointment is made.
Oh wait, they want to use the phone, they just don't want to use it to call people.
They don't want to use it to call people. That's exactly
so,
right.
like you're saying, they can use that technology and find themselves a doctor. What about employers? What kind of involvement should they have in helping their employees with chronic health conditions?
Worksite wellness is a field that people are going into, and so we have worked over the last 10 to 20 years to try to embed wellness within worksites. And so we're trying to make sure that people have access to information, potentially screenings, health checks, blood pressure, diabetes checks, weight checks, help you to quit smoking, all of those things provided within your organization. And so larger organizations do typically have a wellness coordinator of some sort within their organization to help people at least get started on the path to wellness, and then hopefully their primary care doctor will connect them to further resources.
And I would even suggest, it seems like they should offer more sick days and more, not have such a stigma on that, which actually I kind of wanted to work into. How do we end that stigma around physical and mental health problems? And I think the employer can certainly help with that. But
talking about it, I think, is key. We just have to talk about it, get everything out in the open. It needs to be commonplace for people to live with chronic conditions and for other people to understand that. We just really need comprehensive education for people about what chronic illnesses are. One important part of that is what we would call invisible illnesses. And these are things like behavioral health illnesses, where you can't necessarily see that someone's living with a condition. So it is invisible to the population. and people don't look sick, so they're not treated as being sick, and that can be really stigmatizing. So if people understand that people are living with illnesses of all kinds, that will really help in the stigma.
Yep.
And we have talked about, social media is bad, bad, bad. We talk about that all the time, but social media can also be really good for trying to normalize all health conditions. It gives, the internet in general gives you access to information, and so the more we learn, the better we are. And so we are improving that personalized normalizing of certain conditions through putting it out there on social media, seeing that somebody else has the same condition that you have, forming communities of people so that you can share your stories. And that really does help people overcome some of the issues they're unable to talk about or that are invisible to the eye.
And that's a good point, because I think so much social media just gets a bad rap in that it's caused so many problems, but it actually can be used as a good tool as well.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both for being here. I mean, it was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now joining us to talk about the mental health side of things is Dr. Shannon Jones, Chief Medical Officer for Southwestern Behavioral Health. Thank you so much for being here to talk about this. So tell me about, what is a behavioral health condition?
Behavioral health conditions are what we typically called mental health conditions a few years ago. There's not a lot of practical distinction between the two, although some people will say that behavioral health sort of implies the habits that we can get into that are negatively affecting us physically, like substance use disorders. Most of us in the field don't really see a lot of distinction between major depression and addictions like alcoholism or anxiety disorders or tic disorders or ADHD, or all of the pathophysiology of those kind of diseases, and their treatments are very similar. So mental health providers are treating the disorders of emotion and thought and behavior that arise from the central nervous system. That's the organ that we kind of specialize in. We tend to not treat epilepsy, headaches, or brain tumors. We kind of leave that to our neurological colleagues, but we treat those conditions that are typically called psychiatric, or that would be affecting people really all through the life cycle.
So what are some of the trends that we're seeing in millennials when it comes to mental health?
Other generations have faced stress, but the millennials have not had a cakewalk. They have had a lot of stressful situations. They were in school during Columbine and got to deal with the mass shootings that followed. They were there for 9/11 and just sort of coming of age. They started their careers in economically disadvantageous times and saddled with unprecedented levels of debt. They've been affected by social media to a greater extent than previous generations, for sure. And they've never known a world in which they didn't face the existential crisis of climate change. So lots and lots of stress. And we know that stress is bad for mental health and physical health. Millennials have faced higher levels of depression and anxiety, for example, because of all the stressors we think that they've been under.
But do you think it's so much of that they have more stress, or it's different? I mean, I think about, like my parents' generation, they were living during World War II.
Right.
Which certainly wasn't a cakewalk.
And my generation grew up under the constant threat of nuclear war. So
Right.
yeah, it's just a different kind of stress, and it's coming at people younger because of the internet and the social media interactions. There's really strong evidence that associates use of social media with rising rates of depression and anxiety specifically. It's sort of in a dose-response level, so the more social media you're exposed to, the more depressed and anxious you tend to be. So there are some unique stressors on top of just general life stressors that millennials have been facing.
So in some ways, maybe, let's say my parents, when they were younger and there wasn't as much information, so maybe they just didn't know as much about some
They could
of those
live in a bubble.
situations. Right.
People today can't live in bubbles as
Right.
well, because the external world is constantly intruding.
Yeah, and because of social media, which social media certainly had its great purpose.
Oh yeah.
But if used incorrectly.
And there's a lot of positive benefits from social media too,
Sure.
but the negatives are you know, the sort of the bullying, the hateful kind of stuff is stuff we think about with social media, but just even social comparison, like everybody puts on fake personas in social media that their lives are better than it is, but
Right.
that causes other people to feel like their lives are not as good. Plus there's social contagion effects that you can get where people can see through social media, certain mental health conditions displayed, and then that can cause a contagion effect where people will have that similar symptom, or they will be moving towards those symptoms. There's been a good series of studies on functional tick-like behaviors that I like to call TikTok ticks, that especially young girls can get from watching TikTok and seeing other people with tick disorders.
Really? And
Really.
so it's almost like they emulate that? Is that what you-
Yes, but it's an unconscious process, largely. I'm not telling you that they're faking their condition, but they're unhappy enough with their lives in general that they're seeing the attention and the specialness that can come from the way these things are portrayed by certain influencers, and that can cause them to, I don't know, display similar symptoms.
But then is that so much because of social media, or they already have some sort of tendency that maybe they would have picked up something else if it wasn't
That's a
necessarily-
chicken and egg phenomenon.
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
So, yes, it does seem to be more attractive to people that are already having some kind of struggles, but more people are having struggles younger with identity and with where they fit into the world. And a lot of social norms have been broken down, and there's a lot of polarization in our culture, and it just leads people to just seek identity cues elsewhere, and that can make them vulnerable to unusual expressions of their discomfort.
So in some ways, it's an effort to try and fit in, but then it also makes
stand
them
out.
Right, right. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
So what kind of resources are offered in this area for mental health illnesses, in particular for millennials?
This area is really rich with mental health resources. I can start with my own agency, Southwestern Behavioral Health Care. We offer cradle-to-grave comprehensive services for pretty much anybody with a mental health problem. We have excellent addiction services at Stepping Stone. We have child specialty services at the Moran Center. We've even recently started a neurodevelopmental clinic to help people that have intellectual disabilities and autism, plus problems with other mental health problems, which is really common because 85% of people with those developmental disabilities also have some form of mental health problem, like ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder or anxiety disorders, which are really common in that group. We have crisis services that are fantastic. And I must put a plug in for, if you're going to be in crisis, if you're in crisis, 988 may not be the best number to call locally. I don't want to discourage anybody from calling it, but the 988 call centers in Indiana are outside of this community, and so you're going to get better crisis services if you call our local crisis team, which is 422-1100,
Okay.
because they know what's here and they know how to plug you in with it. And we have at Southwestern community support services for people with severe mental illnesses. We have homeless outreach. We have school-based coaches that can go into schools and help kids. We just have a really comprehensive level of service at Southwestern, and that's what we're designed to do because we're our community mental health center. But Evansville also has Deaconess, which has inpatient acute psychiatric services as well as outpatient services. St. Vincent's has inpatient services, including a geropsych unit, and outpatient services. There's lots of really good smaller organizations in town that offer mental health services, like Evansville Psychiatric Associates or Lampion Center or Luzio and Associates or all that kind of stuff. And we happen to have a crisis intervention team in our police force that is fantastic and knows how to work with people in crisis in the community. We have a good system of shelters. And we have a medical school where we are teaching the future doctors of tomorrow how to deal with mental health issues.
So lots of resources. But
Yeah.
How do you think, how does mental health though affect the physical and physical health?
Mental health is the foundation of all health. And there's two mechanisms by which mental health is affecting physical health. One is because the mind and the body aren't separate. So what's going on in the mind is biochemically affecting the other organ systems. And I'll give you an example of that. Like if you're overstressed, you produce chronically high levels of the stress response hormone cortisol, which causes you to put more fat on around your middle, and that is associated with increased risks of heart attack and stroke. So that's more of a biochemical interaction. But also people that are under stress tend to make choices that maximize short-term benefit at the expense of delayed gratification. So they're more likely to use drugs, smoke, eat high-calorie food, engage in other sort of risky behaviors, and they don't learn as well because stress just negatively impacts your ability to learn and grow and think long-term. And those negative health behaviors also accumulate over time to give you a bad health outcome. So we know that people that are under higher levels of stress have higher rates of diabetes and heart disease and autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, and just pretty much anything that can go wrong in your body is going to be made worse by chronic levels of stress.
And so, so it's all working hand in hand. And so the more people can seek out some help beforehand, the better off they are.
For sure.
What about, but I'm assuming insurance will help cover mental health problems. I think probably some people think, oh, I can't go get help for that because my insurance won't cover it. I mean, is that, I know it depends on the insurance company.
It does, and I'm in the field and I can't keep track of everybody's insurance and what they do. And as soon as you do start to learn it, they change the rules. We actually need to be voting for more mental health parity. We have mental health parity laws on the books now, but they're not well enforced.
Thank you so much. It was very informative, and thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to our guests for explaining the increased health issues faced by millennials. Next week, we'll learn more about the Evansville Water and Sewer Utilities Sunrise Pump Station and the amenities it offers the public. Thanks for watching WNIN Newsmakers.